with the most broken people. Can be great leaders.
Everyone, David here, now posting a new podcast segment so that I can give my full, unadulterated, more than 240 characters review of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. This was going to be the next thing that I wanted to make a podcast segment out of, and I'm going to try to abridge it as well as possible because, unfortunately, this is my second time recording this. I actually did a prior, 40 to 45 minute breakdown of the film, very spoiler-free, but also very cohesive and streamlined, only for Audacity to just bork the entire project file and corrupt it. And I wasn't able to retrieve it. I was trying to do so many different solutions, and after 2 hours of deep investigations into the forums, running the command prompts, etc., I couldn't save it. I legitimately could not bring the project back up and revive it. So I am doing a re-recording of sorts, and I'm hoping that maybe this time I'll be able to make even a better job. But this also caused a little bit of a delay into the pretty much at the end or at the beginnings of the following week. So I figured I would take this opportunity to at least give a very spoiler-free review of the film to start, and then towards the end we might get a little bit deep into spoilers, since now the official first weekend of the movie's release is now behind us. I imagine that the majority of the people that wanted to check out the movie have, and I know that for those that will at least be able to check out the first portion of this review, kind of opt out, go watch the movie, and then hopefully come back, whether it be on YouTube or on podcast platforms of their choice. So let's go ahead and get started, in which we have probably one of the more difficult things to do really with a movie of this caliber, whether it be a major blockbuster, and more than a superhero film, which is a movie where the biggest elephant in the room is, what do you do when your main actor unfortunately passed away and he leaves behind a huge impact that was felt by everybody? And of course, that is sadly the case with a movie like Wakanda Forever, where the filmmakers, specifically Ryan Coogler, and then the actors, the cast and crew, everybody involved with the film, producers, Kevin Feige, how do they handle tumultuous task of making a sequel when, unfortunately, Boseman's passing back in, I think it was August of 2020, left a huge void to be filled in, as far as a storytelling perspective, as far as a communal aspect of how to, feel good about making a movie of this scope, while at the same time, how is it to come across it from the right approach? How to be able to read the room and come off as respectful, come off as, paying homage to his legacy and as a tribute. And frankly, I feel like for the majority of the movie, they were able to nail this. And it is a very, almost kind of like a lose-lose situation. Like, I would say that this is one of those things I don't envy any kind of filmmaker that they have to go through. And when I say filmmaker, I don't just specifically mean Ryan Coogler, even though he is the main top person behind the camera as director and co-writer, but also his fellow co-writers, storyboard, the people that created the story for him, producer Kevin Feige, and everybody else involved. And then, of course, everybody in front of the camera, our ensemble cast with Letitia Wright, Denai Guerrera, Angela Bassett, everybody involved. It is a situation I just don't envy of any of them having to handle, because there's going to be people on opposite side tackling this scenario. I don't want to get too much into it. I definitely got into it a little bit more in the original cut of this review, and so now I'm just going to compartmentalize it and saying that whichever direction, and I even saw some people mention this on Twitter, whichever direction they would have gone with it, there would have been some form of uproar in the discussion, whether it be on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, social media as a whole. There would have been some kind of debate, some kind of argument. I would say that what they went with, as far as how they were able to interweave what you can kind of tell was an original story, or at least elements of a story that was there prior to the unfortunate passing of Chadwick Boseman, combined with the situation that they needed to tackle head on, they were able to fuse those elements together in a movie that, for the most part, really did pull itself off from the ground, especially during its first opening act and its closing act. I at least like that we were able to open and finish strong in the movie, because that's where I feel like the movie's strongest and most powerful progressions in order to be able to make a movie of this magnitude really excelled. Because you know how I mentioned that when Love and Thunder came out and I did my review of that back when I was doing still the weekly podcast and I had my dedicated segment to review that movie, I mentioned that this is arguably that movie that people often criticize Marvel for. It's that parody type of film that people often use as the scapegoat to criticize Marvel for the abundance of jokes, for not taking itself seriously, for being kind of hokey and just being overly saturated with those elements to never really take itself seriously. Black Panther Wakanda Forever is able to be conscious and mature when not to do that. And for the bulk of the movie, it has a very cohesive sense of maturity and consciousness to be able to handle its very deep themes about grief and letting go and moving on, while at the same time paying homage to those that we those that we say goodbye to and what they leave behind. And this movie does it very poignantly, especially like I said during that first act and that third act, and that's where you get, like I mentioned, the most powerful moments, especially with the movie, the way that this movie ends and the way it closes. Again, not gonna divulge too much because I want to keep it as spoiler free as possible during this opening segment, but it does it in a way that just kind of floored me, not just because of how it was edited together, written, and composed together as we watched it on screen before our eyes, but also the way it was just kind of giving us this almost self-aware message, all of us together in the theater, not just me and my girlfriend, but everybody that I saw this audience with, who ended up being a major turnout for a 12 p.m. showing on Friday. I saw this on Friday, technically speaking opening day, but it is still 12 o'clock. It is still a weekday, so I personally kind of wasn't really expecting to have a major crowd with us in an IMAX showing, especially since the IMAX is going to be a little costlier. It's a weekday, it's the middle of the day, people are still at work, still at school. I gotta be honest, I was a little naive in thinking that there wasn't going to be a turnout, and I had trouble finding parking. And when I walked in, the room was damn near full. And what even, like I said, surprised me even more was knowing that an awful lot of us were very self-aware of what the movie was trying to convey in paying respects to Chadwick Boseman, and when to know when to laugh, when to know how to absorb a certain moment that happened with the characters on screen. It was just handled with care in a way that I'm like, yes, this could have gone in an RE direction. Like I said, after Love and Thunder, I was getting worried for Marvel. And you know, the trajectory of Marvel was doing weird things, both on the big and small screen. Love and Thunder being the counterpart for the theater experience of me going, oh my God, this is just what people needed to make fun of superhero movies. And then on the smaller screen, She-Hulk. Not needed to say anything further than that. So the way that Wakanda Forever was able to come in and be like, hey, we know when to, we can still remember when to be funny and when not to be. And that's why the first opening and third act were able to close in on those themes, know when to be grounded and know when to be emotional, but also still have its moments of levity to make sure that you're not just having a very dour moment from one to another and not just be, just kind of flat out depressed, especially when you take into consideration how long this movie is. It is 2 hours and 41 minutes. It's so far, I think, the second longest MCU movie right behind Endgame. And so the movie knows exactly when to kind of level its way off from the ground, lift its head up, like Rihanna likes to say in the song she made for this movie, but also, know exactly when to, not be sad all the time, because they know that, Chadwick at the end of the day probably wouldn't have wanted us to just be sad and depressed with ourselves in the theater the entire time. He would want us to have a good time. And as somewhat calculated and cold as this might sound, this is, at the end of the day, still a Marvel movie. It still needs to be a movie, be entertaining, and fall into that calculation of the business sense. And that's when we get our second act. where the movie then kind of flips itself from going into a narrative approach where we get introduced to Namor. This is our main villain of the film, even though there are some things to kind of multi-dimensionalize this character in a way that I really did like. I really did dig how Ryan Coogler was able to handle Namor almost not in the same vein, but to the same kind of quality as he handled Killmonger. There's different motivations at hand here. There's almost like kind of like a mirror reflection going on. That's both figuratively and literally. If you take into consideration one of the final one-sheet posters that was recently released that I really liked, that showed kind of like the dichotomy going on behind Shuri and Wakanda and Namor and Talco. I'm butchering the name, but it's technically not Atlantis. They did change the background there, and in my opinion, for the better, because not only do I like that a little bit of light is shed on, technically speaking, my ancestry coming from the Aztecs and Mexico, but also because there's something just a little bit more nuanced about having these much more, I don't know what it is. Something that's a bit more rooted in reality, because Wakanda is technically still in Africa. It's a fictionalized a country, but it's rooted in African roots. And just like the fictionalized city here is of that Namor comes from, is still rooted within Yucatan Aztec kind of heritage. So there's something to kind of bring things to a altered version of reality that lives inside of the Marvel universe, and I really dug that. And also our main actor here, what's his name? Tenoch Huerta Mejia, I think is his name. It's funny because the movie says introducing, and yet I'm like, didn't I see him before? Wasn't he in some shows recently? And he was, but this is like his first major breakout role, and I feel like he nailed it out of the park, which is something that I can use as is something that was definitely a constant throughout, which are the performances. Not just him, but Letitia Wright, Denai Guerrera. Everybody is able to handle this thing in a way where they're, as messed up as it is, because I remember hearing Henry Winkler's character from Barry mention this, that sometimes when things do get sad and heavy and quite real in real life, as actors, you sometimes need to utilize that so that you can favor the project, favor the big picture of a movie. And I feel like the work was kind of cut out for a lot of the cast members here with Wakanda Forever, because the level of power and just vulnerability and believability between all these characters are handled it more than just simply looking at the project and going, oh, it's just a Marvel movie. Most especially Angela Bassett. Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with a lot of other people that are speaking on social media here that she could potentially, I mean, I'm choking up just thinking about her performance. She could potentially be the one to give a Marvel movie the first acting Oscar nomination. I think she really could be a contender for the Best Supporting Actress category. We'll see. I mean, it's a little bit more believable than it was a few years ago, since Black Panther, the first one, was the first Marvel movie, or even superhero movie, if you want to count it, to take a Best Picture nomination. Should have been Dark Knight back in 2008, but we're not gonna dig up old axes here with the Academy. But it looks like we can have another first on our hands, and that's an acting nomination in a Marvel movie, and that could be for Angela Bassett, because there are numerous scenes where she's able to really she walks a tightrope where on one side she's got the responsibilities of a queen to her nation, and then she has the instincts to follow as a mother for her children, specifically Shuri. And being able to balance those responsibilities, you definitely feel the weight on her shoulders through her performance. Specifically, the famous "Have I not given everything" scene. You'll know when you get to it if you have not seen the movie, and you've seen snippets of it from the trailer. This is definitely, if she gets nominated, that's definitely the scene that they're gonna use when they play her Oscar clip. I don't really know exactly about a win, considering the competition being a little stark this year. I know there's an awful lot of names being thrown out for the different acting categories, but if she is not revealed to be at least one of the nominees, I will legitimately get pissed. But that's the one thing that you can count on throughout this movie are those performances and how everybody's able to handle their respective roles. And that's definitely something, one of the movie's strengths to latch onto and hold on very tight when we get to the second act, where I found the movie's biggest problems were on full display. Because it's during the second act where, again, a lot of the problems with the movie just kind of came forward, and I thought to myself, oof, we're doing such an excellent job of being able to handle the themes of mourn and loss, that then the movie, like I mentioned before, remembers that it's a Marvel movie. That also comes with a little bit of the heavy handedness on the humor. There are some jokes that really do come off well and did land for me, most of which come from the introduction of Riri Williams. This is not a spoiler, you see this in the trailer. Riri Williams, it is introduced in this movie, kind of like in the same vein as Black Panther himself was introduced in Civil War, and she'll be getting her own Ironheart series on Disney+. And she definitely has a good kind of retort with Shuri and Denai Guerrera. There's an awful lot of chemistry between the three of them when they are on screen and have their own little set pieces, resulting in, to me, my favorite action sequence that takes place on that road bridge between her and the other. I know they're not Atlanteans, but the other, Namor's people, specifically the main heavy juggernaut there, Atuma, where there's a particular fight between her and Okoye that even I was like, God damn, they definitely choreographed this very well. But there are times where we do rely a little bit on that traditional, slightly overdone Marvel humor. Specific scenes where it's a little bit on the saturated point, where it's just one joke after another, and I'm like, okay, guys, kind of reel it back, understand what's at stake here, because there are times where I feel like they were just leaning a little too heavy on. And it's because the quality and the jokes themselves weren't bad. It's just how condensed they were within one scene that they could have handled it a little bit better by spreading them out. Specifically in that second act, and the humor wasn't the only thing that I think really needed to be spread out. It was also this segment where the movie, just out of nowhere, decides to take a giant dump, as graphic as it sounds, dump of exposition in the middle of the movie. It's almost like the movie takes the pause button and says, let me explain exactly what the plan is behind Namor and his people and why he's the villain. And I thought to myself, this is filmed very well. Cinematography is decent, and there's some good performances here by some child actors, the actor who plays Namor himself, etc. There's a lot of technical elements here that are working at their strongest, but I still don't understand, despite the slightly self-aware line here in the middle where even one character says, why are you explaining all this? It's just not enough for me to look at it from a slight critical eye and be like, you literally just paused the movie to say, here's the plan, or here's where I came from. And I personally thought it was a little trite, and this also kind of lent a little bit to that bloated running time that at the end still didn't feel like it was wholeheartedly justified. To this day, I feel like the only Marvel movies that felt justified in their very exasperated running time are still Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, Captain America Civil War, and I guess most recently Spider-Man No Way Home, because of how much it's tackling. No Way Home is tackling the different Spider-Man and the different multiversal consequences of that. Self-explanatory. Endgame and Infinity War are these massive blockbuster events, and Civil War was kind of like the appetizer to that, because even though it's titled Captain America, it's pretty much Avengers 2.5 if you really look back at it. So a movie of this sort, yes, it's struggling with heavy themes about grief and loss, but at the end, this kind of matches with Eternals in being a movie that didn't really need to be all that long still. And on one side, you can kind of understand the argument that maybe this is kind of their way to try to bring things to a close, should they want this to be the proper resolute tribute to the legacy that Chadwick left behind, and how this could inadvertently and maybe accidentally put the pause on the plans for Black Panther in the the characters. Black Panther, the mantle, so to speak, not just Black Panther, the hero, but the Black Panther mantle to be put on hold while Marvel tries to figure shit out, especially as we enter Phase 5. But this second act is really what propelled me to think that it still did not need to be at the length that it was, especially because of the clunky exposition and a little bit of leniency towards the humor. And this is also where we get the majority of our Easter eggs and connections to some of the big picture stuff. It's definitely one of the leaner movies as far as Easter eggs is concerned, but there's one in particular during the second act that most definitely felt like a reshoot. It felt like almost that was not even the internal plan to be included in here, and almost at the last second they said, yeah, we got to include this character, we got to include this cast member, and draw parallels to the most recent movies in Phase 4 because we need to kind of save face. That's at least how it came across to me as I watched it. Nevertheless, though, at least that was in the middle, and we were able to lead up to a climax that was able to still play at its strengths about performances, about emotion, about those themes of loss and grief. Though there was a moment that made me think about The Last of Us Part 2, and I do, even though it didn't bring me to the point of like anger or very heavy frustration, from a writing standpoint, I still look at this certain mechanic and thought to myself, yeah, guys, it's about time that we retire this because I'm getting kind of tired of it. I really am. And I'll definitely divulge a little bit more into the spoilers. But I'm happy to see that, like I said, the movie was able to kind of work with itself and handle itself with care, with grace, poignancy, even down to the end credits scene, where we have a mid-credits scene that serves more almost like an epilogue to the movie more than anything else, and there's no end credit scene at the end after the full scrolling credits. And frankly, I feel like that was the right thing to do because we don't want to deter away from that last message about legacy, moving on, but also being okay to move on and being okay to end the point of grieving so that we can heal ourselves. Because ultimately, that was the message that the movie was trying to deliver, and I really did get that. I just feel like the second act, which from a writing standpoint often makes up the bulk of the movie and really needs to serve as a connective bridge to tie it all together, was arguably where, for me at least, was the majority of the problems that plagued the movie. So I'm going to be giving Black Panther Wakanda Forever a 7 out of 10. If I were to rate it, I still think that it's a very good and well-intentioned and well-put-together movie, handled with care and with the situation that was dealt at hand. And I think by default, I would say that this is probably the best Phase 4 movie. I mean, I know we got No Way Home in there, but that's... And I guess technically No Way Home would be my favorite Phase 4 movie up until this point. But let's be honest, that's my biases speaking. If I was to take my biases out of the equation, Wakanda Forever is the one that, from a craftsmanship standpoint, is probably the better made one. But my favorite would still technically go to No Way Home, with Wakanda Forever following right behind it. And it's actually rather a fitting end for Phase 4. I would probably say that if we are to start Phase 5 with Quantumania in February, this was probably a very cathartic way to wrap things up in that respect.
His people did not call him General or King. They called him Kukulkan, the feather serpent god. Killing him will risk eternal war.
He's coming for the surface world.
So now we're going to be getting into those spoilers. So if you have not seen Black Panther Wakanda Forever, then please stop watching or listening at this point. Go and see the movie whenever you're managed to sneak it into your schedule, and then come back. Especially if this was being watched or listened to by you on YouTube, then it should be able to save you the spot. Otherwise, check out the time, and then you'll be able to scroll to it. Now, the fun thing is, though, is that there's really not a whole lot to really, start theorizing and breaking down because, like I mentioned towards the end there of the spoiler-free section, this is one of the more self-contained Marvel movies in the respectful sort of way, because you kind of have to in order to be able to, focus on the theme and never detract and never disrespect from the conclusion that it leaves you with, which is about being able to move on, not just with our characters from T'Challa's passing, but also the cast and crew and everybody behind the scenes that were impacted and touched and really hurt by the passing of Chadwick Boseman. So I really did respect and frankly loved that the only mid-credit scene that we get is one that, like I mentioned, serves as an epilogue, because the ending sees Shuri finally burning her funeral clothes, pretty much demonstrating that she's done with her period of grieving. She's ready to move on. We get our end credit scene that is beautifully done over those funeral clothes, so nothing too flashy, no hip hop song like in the first one. Even though that's not a bad song, it's a pretty catchy song from the first one. But we get Rihanna's song playing over this, and it was, like I said, the right move, the right direction. When this ends, we then cut back to Shuri in front of that fire with Nakia, I think was her name, Lupita Nyong'o's character, who comes in with a little boy, and that's where I was like, oh god damn it, they're gonna do it, and it involves this boy turning out to be T'Challa's son. His Haitian name is Toussaint, which I get the reference, but his real Wakanda name is still T'Challa, named after his father, who potentially may have named him knowing that maybe this mystery illness was gonna take him. And that was that stung a little bit. Like, goddamn, like he really had to go in that direction. It also kind of subtly, in a way where, to delicately put it, it kind of provides the filmmakers a little bit of an option if they want to keep going with Shuri taking on the mantle of the Black Panther in the third movie, or if they want to do a form of a time jump where maybe this boy grows up to be the next king of Wakanda and take on the Black Panther mantle. Of course, way too early and rather, pointless to really think about right now. We just got done with this movie, and like I said, the release of this movie overall, not just with the scenes in question here at the end, but with the movie itself, serves as a way to kind of end the mourning period. And now going forward, we could look at Black Panther and be like, okay, what are they going to be? What's Wakanda's role going to be in Secret Wars? Is the vibranium something that Doom is going to be going after? Is all this going to factor in? And the movie's almost kind of telling us that it's okay to now start theorizing it in that way. Start looking at this corner of the universe in that manner as comic book fans, as superhero movie fans, and not feel the sting of knowing that Chadwick is gone. Like that's what it took away from this, while at the same time still looking at his legacy as like, hey, you left behind something special and we recognize that. And that's how I took away the ending and that reveal with the mid-credit scene, and I thought it was really done very, very effectively. And again, really well acted by Letitia Wright and Lupita Nyong'o and all those folks involved, especially after the hard losses that they experienced. Which brings me to one of the major losses because Shuri is really put through it in this movie. And that's why it was really important that she was written well and that Letitia Wright performed it really well. And I think that she did, because not only does she lose her brother, I think, a second time? Or technically speaking, a third time at the beginning of this movie due to the illness. But again, that's something that needed to happen because of the way the circumstances in real life played out. One circumstance I felt was going to happen anyway. This is, like I mentioned in the spoiler-free section, this is one of the elements in the script I looked at and went, I think this was part of the plan even before Chadwick's passing. I feel like this was maybe an idea that Ryan Coogler was bouncing around even before things unfortunately happen in real life, and that is the death of Ramonda, played by Angela Bassett, the Queen, who unfortunately gets taken away here in this movie, which drives the revenge and the anger of our central character, Shuri, where I would make the argument that I think in the original script, I think T'Challa would have wrestled with dealing with vengeance, but at the same time, I will come out and kind of illustrate some creative criticism here, and that's kind of a theme he already went through in Civil War, so that would have been redundant. So at least I'm kind of glad that it was switched on over to Shuri so that then she can go through her arc. And that's why I thought that it was actually kind of cool that she saw Killmonger when she took the fruit, as opposed to seeing T'Challa or even the Queen. The Queen, I would say, not yet, which she does see her a little later on when she shows mercy. And that was the one thing that I drew parallels to Last of Us Part 2, and I criticized in my spoiler-free discussion that I think we need to retire of this character going through all these links to extract vengeance, and right when they're at that moment, they see the person that was taken away, they see that person that says, no, you don't have to do this, and they pull at the last minute, and it's getting kind of cliche. Like, it's something that, like I said, we kind of have to retire. I guess that's kind of a spoiler there for Last of Us Part 2 if you have not played the game, I'm sorry, but it's I'm kind of over it at this point, and I think it's time to retire it. But at least, again, this is at least in a movie. It's not in like a 25 to 30 hour game, so at least there's less involvement from the participant here, so I guess that's why I was able to digest it a little bit better than some other gamers were able to do with like with a game like Last of Us Part 2, but it's still kind of there. That's why I feel like that was an element that I think was going to still factor in a story involving T'Challa, but at least this time it felt a little better because it was happening to Shuri, something that she has not gone through. T'Challa technically had already gone through that in Civil War, so it would have been a little redundant. So if things have worked in an alternate way where Chadwick was still with us, T'Challa was still the main character, I think it would have been a major issue to have killed off Ramonda and still have him go through the path of vengeance. Or maybe Shuri was the one to go extract vengeance, and maybe T'Challa has to go after her and be like, no, this is not the way. That actually would have been a nice little kind of dichotomy, that to see him kind of mentor Shuri in a way where it's like, you're going the path of Killmonger, let's not do this. I'm not going to let you kind of, and that would have been interesting. That would have been like a, Vader to Luke kind of dynamic, and that would have been fascinating. But like I said, with the circumstances at hand, that's something that could not be looked into. But that's where we do get into some areas of theorization and speculation, but frankly, that's all that we can really do at this point, unless I ever manage to get a one-on-one with Ryan Coogler in that sense. Outside of that, like I said, that's actually really about it for the major spoilers. As far as Easter eggs, there's only, like I said, one, and even then, I feel like it wasn't very consequential to not only the movie, but also the big picture thing. It just felt like something that needed to be injected in order to paint the big picture, which is the inclusion of the Countess, or Director de la Fontaine, I think is her last name, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Dreyfus. Sorry, I messed that up. Dreyfus, who is introduced here via a scene with her and Martin Freeman's Everett Ross character. It's revealed that they used to be married. To be quite honest, that just kind of comes out of left field and serves as an excuse for her to be involved here and to her poke her nose in people's business, learn some intel so that she can form her Thunderbolts team. Not much to really extract from there, to be quite honest. She literally has just like I said, the 3 scenes, or maybe even less than that. I think it was only like the 2 scenes, and because of that, there's really not much more to really talk about except to walk away from those scenes and go, yeah. It was during the second act where the Marvel movie needed to remember that it was a Marvel movie and needs to at least have some form of reference to the big picture, and that's what it was right here. I would even speculate or theorize that Coogler was maybe against this idea, but somehow either Kevin Feige or somebody else talked him into it and says, hey, I understand what you need to do, but we do need to include a reference in order to factor into the Thunderbolts, get that momentum going, so that going into phase 5, and that was the end result. And like I mentioned in the spoiler-free discussion, in the spoiler-free review, this felt like a reshoot. Like, if you take those scenes and kind of cut them out, the big picture's leave is still untapped. It's still untouched. The whole movie goes off as it goes along, and frankly, those are probably the elements of the movie that could have been sacrificed to de-bloat the movie and kind of at least condense it a little bit away from that 2 hour and 41 minute runtime. So yeah, those are the major really things to talk about. There's probably a couple of other Easter eggs that I might have gone over my head. A lot of us could really talk about, Ironheart and Riri Williams, but she played her role. She's going back home, and she's probably going to be taking an awful lot of the things that she learned here upon building her suit, whether it be the first one that she crashed on that freeway, or the second one that she made for the climax, and maybe refine it in a way where she's going to get involved with some shit in back home in Boston during the Ironheart show. Outside of that, like I said, nothing. There was no worm on the lure for me to go, oh, what could that be? What could that? I really didn't take anything away, unless it was maybe in the background or on some text or something like that. And there's probably some eagle-eyed viewers that were able to catch a little bit more than what I could. But that was my main key takeaway. I would probably say the only other issue that I had with Riri Williams is that she learned a little quicker to handle that suit than someone like Tony, but at least Tony had a full-blown movie, not just a inclusion in somebody else's movie. So that's probably where I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate, and maybe that's where the show will come into mind, where she has to go through some trial and error to refine her suit and potentially become the next Iron Man successor. Outside of that, there's really not much more to really talk about as far as spoilers. That really about does it. So I don't really want to keep you guys too long. Thank you guys for listening and for watching. If you're checking this out on YouTube, if you guys enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up button. If not, hit the thumbs down. And if you are listening to this through YouTube, let me know in the comment section what you guys thought of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. If you are going to be talking about some spoilers, put some kind of disclaimer, some kind of little bold text saying spoilers ahead. Be courteous, be kindful, and as always, guys, be humble and stay humble. Thank you for listening again, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
We know what you whisper. They have lost their protector. Now is our time to strike. Show them who we are.